Hi, so as I said, this is a video about the Tory leadership race. Now, no doubt there'll be more to say about this as time goes on, but at the moment, with this wide field of eight candidates, and of course it was 12 only a few days ago, um, it will narrow down greatly, I think, by this evening. I think the second round is going to come up, but it's still going to be a prolonged process. The new leader, the 1922 committee, won't be in, has announced it won't be announced until the 5th of September. So it's still, month and a half. Um, I don't really know why it has to be so prolonged. I think that obviously deciding the next Prime Minister of the country, the 56th Prime Minister, it's not a small thing. So of course it has to be done thoroughly and they need to make the right choice, but it does seem a bit prolonged. Um, So I'm just going to briefly talk about the candidates. This is not going to be extensive, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more to say about this. So I'm just going to briefly have a little look at who's going forward. A few disclaimers. In this country, we don't directly elect prime ministers. Even in the other circumstance in which a prime minister comes to office, which is a general election, um, that's the party that the people vote for. I think it is fair to say that, particularly under Thatcher and Blair, there was a degree of presidential feel about it whereby there was an increased focus on leadership. And of course, in the 1992 Labour campaign, Neil Kinnock ran a almost presidential style campaign, which was kind of derided at the time because it was seen as just not a British thing. He had a big rally at Sheffield. Um, but I think it's fair to say that in this country, the prime minister is the personality is a big thing. Much bigger, for example, than say the prime minister in France, where the president is the big face of politics. Um, so even though we don't directly elect prime ministers, it's still, I think the public is interested in who's at the top. Um, in this case, it's Tory MPs, as I understand, elects the leader. I don't even know if it's members. I would like to think as members, as Labour members, vote for the leader. I don't know if it's Tory members or just Tory MPs, which would be even less democratic, essentially. But that's what it is. So the rest of us have to kind of watch on. Um, but the way, I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily undemocratic because the Tories won the 2019 general election. So in that sense, the people vote for the ruling party, and that party has the right to determine who they want to front it. Um, so who do we have? It's now down now to Rishi Sunak, Jeremy Hunt, Penny Mordaunt, Liz Truss, Nadeem Sahawi, Suella Braverman, um, Kimmy Badenoch, and Tom Tugendhat. So pretty diverse group of people. There we have four women, four men. We have four ethnic minority people as well. Um, just thinking off the top of my head there, is that right? Five ethnic minority people. Let's see, we have um, Sunak, Zahawi, Braverman, Badenoch, yeah, four. But the point is, it's a diverse mix. Um, I'm just going to double check that if I've got that right, actually, because I'm sort of thinking off the top of my head. I took a screenshot actually from the news. Um, I had a shot of the candidates. Yeah, so four ethnic minority candidates. So that's significant because it means that there's a very strong chance that the next leader and prime minister will either be a woman or an ethnic minority. Now, being a woman really isn't that big news now. We've had two women prime ministers, so as time goes on, we will have more, and it's I really think it becomes less significant each time, less relevant, as it should be. I mean, that's uh, Britain's a long history of female leaders, actually, when we look at some of our most influential queens as well. But there is also a strong chance that the next prime minister will be our first ethnic minority prime minister. Now, although I strongly believe in meritocracy, there's no escaping the fact that that will be an historic event. Absolutely, it will be a big thing. And it is right that there is news focus on that. I wouldn't say it's a small aspect, I would say it is historic. But I think the Tories are miles ahead when it comes to meritocracy in terms of avoiding identity politics. I think that's refreshing. And it is one thing I like about the Tories, the fact that they do focus more on meritocracy, whereas Labour is obsessed by shortlists and quotas and so on. Um, but looking at the candidates, they all have some flaws and skeletons. I think this particular Tory government is quite sleazy. I think it's got quite a lot of skeletons, and I think that's one of the negative legacies of the Johnson era. So actually, that could favour Penny Mordaunt and Tom Tugendhat, the fact that they were not in this administration. They might actually, and Jeremy Hunt for that matter, they might actually find themselves in a stronger position in that sense. Um, Ben Wallace was, of course, briefly named, but he ruled himself out. He says he wants to get on with the job of being Defence Secretary. I'm not overly surprised by that. I never saw him as particularly ambitious. I'm surprised by Dominic Raab. I honestly thought Raab would be putting his name forward. I don't know why. He just strikes me as an ambitious parliamentarian. Um, he's a big name in politics, so I was surprised by that. I don't know what his reasoning was for not standing forward. Priti Patel, for some time she was considered a potential prime minister. She's pulled out. I assume she didn't get the 20 MPs, so she's a polarizing figure in Tory circles. So I think what's probably going to happen, and this is not my conjecture, this is generally what's being seen, is it's going to be Rishi Sunak versus somebody else. Sunak is the front runner. There's nothing unconventional about a chancellor becoming prime minister. Like I said before, in recent years we've had John Major, Gordon Brown, going a little bit further back, James Callaghan. They were all chancellors before they became prime minister. It's not really surprising that the second most powerful job in the country, the person in that role gets into the first most powerful job. It's really not that surprising. Rishi Sunak, in many ways, he's molded like an ideal prime minister. He's smart, he's polished, he's, I think, clearly capable. He's young, only 42, which would make him, he would surpass both Tony Blair and David Cameron to be the youngest Prime Minister of modern times. And of course, he'd make history as the first British Asian, specifically British Indian Prime Minister. Would it be an Obama moment? I don't know because I'm not sure if he has the same rapport with the public as Obama did, but it would be a historic moment. Um, Sunak's finance is the fact he's extremely wealthy. There will be some quarters certainly would question that, and this video that's now emerging when he was a young man saying he had no working class friends. Honestly, I think that's almost reverse snobbery. I don't really care. I mean, there's no obligation that you had to have working class friends. I mean, would you put the same thing on Jeremy Corbyn or a left wing politician and say, why did you not have any um, upper class friends? It's kind of reverse snobbery. Um, what really matters is his attitude to working class people and what his policies will do for those who are struggling. That's what really matters. Now, as Chancellor, I know Jacob Rees-Mogg has criticised him as he put it, being a socialist Chancellor, but he did provide significant support to businesses during the pandemic. And I think for a period he was pretty popular with pub patrons. I remember the signs in Wetherspoons, Rishi specials and um, Sunak specials even, and I think he was probably the most popular chancellor for some time. Um, there was a period where Sunak was the most popular member of cabinet, and that's rare for a chancellor. Usually, the chancellor is a person who has to be quite tight-fisted, whereas the prime minister wants to spend. But this chancellor's been quite fairly popular as politicians go, and I'm saying that with some caution because I wouldn't say any of these people is extremely popular with the public. Um, his wife's tax affairs, I think it is valid to ask questions about that. It gets into the issue of ethics in public life. So, usually I would say family is a no-go. That should be a private, that their privacy should be respected. But it does matter when it gets into potential legalities, when it gets into ethics in public life, i.e., if Sunak pulled strings to help his wife. There are issues around that. So I don't think that's invalid to ask those questions. Earlier this year, he compared himself to Will Smith defending his wife's honor. Um, make of that what you will. But Sunak is the man to beat. I could see him as a prime minister quite easily, but he's the man to beat. Some of those names really aren't known in the public. Um, Someone like Suella Braverman, for example, she's Attorney General, but other than those of us who follow politics, ask someone on the street who she is. I really think most people won't know. There were some total non-entities, with all due respect to them, putting their names forward. That guy, Chisty, he was a backbencher. I mean, really, that was. It almost seems like a cynical ploy to back someone else, because they honestly have to be asking themselves, to have a chance of winning. People with ministerial experience, sure, or even someone like Tom Tugendhat, who hasn't had ministerial experience, or rather cabinet experience, but he's a fairly well-known MP at least in political circles, mostly for his tough stance on China. Well, I'll just talk about Tom Tugendhat now. I like that about the man. I think we do need a leader who is tough on China and assertive with China. Sunak's foreign policy, I don't know much about. He hasn't made that many statements about it, I can tell. So it's a bit of a hidden quality. I'd like to know more about his stance on Russia and China. Um, Tom Tugendhat, I think, would be tough on China. That's important. I don't think he's going to win. Um, One thing that irritates me about the Tories is they're still obsessed by Brexit. It's all about, oh, who's pro Brexit and who's anti Brexit, and as if that should be a mark of choosing the leader. Well, Brexit's done. So none of these people, even if they did vote Remain, someone like Jeremy Hunt, is going to try and overturn Brexit. I mean, there's this dogmatic fixation with Brexit in Tory ranks, which is, excuse me, excuse me, I had soup for lunch, so yeah, it just irritates me. Let's see who else. Kimmy Badenoch. Again, that would be historic. She'd be our first black prime minister, black female prime minister. She's young. Um, Very smart. One thing I like about Kimmy Badenoch is she's anti-woke. But importantly, she's anti-woke in a way that isn't just kind of Fox News populism. She's very reasonable. She makes very reasonable arguments. Um, so is Suella Braverman. They have both spoken out in favour, for example, and so has Liz Truss actually. The Tories have made a bit of a name for themselves by taking on the woke, particularly those three, Truss, Braverman, and Badenoch. That's a good thing. I find it refreshing because when you get trans bullies, trans activists who are bullying women into what gender pronouns mean, really there needs to be pushback. Kimmy Badenoch, the only Achilles heel I would say she has is A, she's not that well known in the wider public, and B, she does have a bit of a lack of experience. I think she's smart, I think she's capable. I just think it's a little bit early to be running for Prime Minister. Having said that, Rishi Sunak's only been an MP for 6 years. That would be a very fast rise. Go from being elected in 2015 to being Prime Minister in, well, 7 years. That's incredible. Um, I'm trying to think if there's been a quicker rise. David Cameron's was quite fast, but even his was not as fast as potentially Sunak's. Um, yeah, so Kimmy Badenoch, I've seen some real vitriolic things from the left. There was one BLM activist who said that her defense of the British Empire and her hostility to black identity, this isn't verbatim, but this was what the attack was about. As she put it, she can crawl back into her mother's. Um, it was a disgusting comment. It really was. And I think there's a particularly vicious side of the left which attacks ethnic minority people who don't conform to their worldview. That is, they expect ethnic minority people to sort of jump on this bandwagon of identity politics and this narrative of oppression. And because people like Suella Braverman and Kimmy Badenoch and others don't, they become enemy number one. Sajid Javid got that sort of heat when he first became Chancellor and Home Secretary, actually, before that. It's disgraceful. By all means, criticise their politics, criticise their policies, but this idea that they somehow owe loyalty to a particular ideology is absurd. I find it very refreshing that these people are unapologetically patriotic and they're calling for a balanced approach to, for example, the teaching of the British Empire. That's a very important thing. I believe Suella Braverman's background is from Mauritius, of Kenyan Asian descent, unless I'm mistaken. Um, who else do we have? Liz Truss, strong foreign secretary. I think she's been tough on Russia and China. Again, she's a target of the trans lobby because of her views on women, what a woman is. Um, but it's become almost a cliche for Tory women to model themselves on fashion. So yeah, it's a cliche. But I'd say she's one of the more heavyweight candidates. Nadim Sahawi, very interesting backstory. He fled Iraq. He came to this country illiterate. He taught himself English. Again, very wealthy, but I honestly wouldn't hold that against someone unless it reflects on their attitude to the poorest. I mean, for example, what would their attitude be towards um, DWP? Would they be sympathetic to people who are struggling? Would they, there's a whole domain there which I don't like about Tory thinking, but that would be any Tory. Anyway, Zahawi, to have a story like that, to have a man like that who was basically a refugee who couldn't speak English becoming British Prime Minister, it would be inspiring. Um, I think he's very capable, but again, he's not widely known in the public. He's only been Chancellor for a few days. He's obviously smart, to accept the job of Chancellor and then to call for the man who appointed him to resign. Some might say it's ungrateful. Um, but the country needed a chancellor. Um, thing with Sahawi again, financial question marks over some of his dealings. Um, but he's one to watch. Definitely one to watch. Inspiring backstory. He's obviously smart. Um, but again, he really needs to get his name out there in the public. Again, most people won't have heard of him. So who else do we have? Penny Mordaunt. I don't know about her. She's a Royal Navy reservist. She seems quite stable, centre ground. She was Defence Secretary, so she's some ministerial experience, albeit briefly. And she wasn't in the Johnson administration, so she won't be tainted by that. Some of the other candidates may actually be tainted by the fact that they were in this very, what many people see as a corrupt administration. Penny Mordaunt won't have that. She seems to be very popular with backbenchers and with Tory members. In fact, she's vying with Sunak in some polls, which is interesting. Who else do we have? Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy Hunt, very big name in politics. Controversial with the left because of his tenure as health secretary, but he was the longest serving health secretary. I think he's quite centre ground. Some Tories will not trust him because he voted Remain, which is unfortunate. I think that's insular. I mean, Brexit's done. No Tory MP who voted Remain is going to try and overturn that. It just isn't going to happen. Um, I think Hunt would be a safe pair of hands. He's certainly experienced. He was foreign secretary. Um, he's a safe pair of hands. I do wonder how tough he will be, though, on Russia and China. I think sometimes Hunt needs to be a little bit more bold. I think sometimes he's a little bit cautious. That's the impression I get. And maybe he was a little bit too cautious when he was running against Johnson. Although, notably, Johnson avoided direct debates. So that's something I don't think of highly in leadership debates or leadership contests. So, of all those people, I mean, I'm not a Tory, but who would I like to see in as 56th Prime Minister? Honestly, I don't think any of them would be terrible. Um, Suella Braverman as Attorney General, my question for her would be, did you question the justice system? Did you question why, for example, the parole board keeps releasing dangerous criminals? Did you question why, as Attorney General, so many cases that are referred to the Court of Appeal are not overturned? That would be my question over her tenure as Attorney General. I wrote to her, actually, because members of the public can. Um, so I don't know about her. She's kind of pitching herself as a hardline Brexiteer, but again, that's just it's kind of insular because this should be about more than Brexit. Um, Liz Truss, I think, is a strong foreign secretary. Honestly, I don't think any of them will be terrible. Well, Westminster was on fire today. Sir Lindsay Hoyle expelled two members, apparently, of the Alba Party, Kenny McCaskill and someone else, whose name I don't know, but they're of Alex Salmond's new Alba Party. They were expelled, apparently, for interrupting over Indy too. My, all I'll say about that is the Scottish Nationals should respect democracy and the so-called once in a life, once in a generation rather referendum. Hoyle really lost his temper with them. It was in the dispatch box. Starmer was quite sharp again. I mean, this is a new Starmer. So much for dullness. Although Johnson spoke about Captain Snoof's Fest, but Johnson's now basically lame duck prime minister, so he can say what he wants. Um, that's it, really. I mean, I think by this evening it will narrow down to two. I think it's almost certainly going to be Rishi Sunak versus someone else. If I were to predict it, it might be someone unexpected, like Sunak versus Braverman. I think she's a very ambitious woman. I think there's a bit of Pretty Patel coming through there. Maybe she was the hidden Pretty Patel that people didn't really recognize. I mean, the notion was Patel was always a very fiercely ambitious um, person. There are a lot of egos in the Tory party, but it's interesting that Patel isn't in this list. Also interesting that Rab isn't there. I'm surprised by that. But I think it'll be Sunak versus someone else. Probably, if I were to predict, I don't think it's going to be Jeremy Hunt, although he'd be a safe pair of hands. I think it's going to be a Lever, unfortunately. I mean, unfortunately, in the sense I don't think it should come down to that, but probably Sunak versus, if I were to have a guess, one of the women, probably. I don't think Badenoch, although she's popular, I just think she will be seen as too inexperienced. I think it's just not her time. I'd like to see her in a cabinet for sure. Maybe something like Home Secretary. Who knows? But I'm going to guess Sunak versus Truss. I'm going to say, yeah, Rishi Sunak versus Liz Truss. That would be my prediction. See what happens. And of course, there'll be more to say about this as time goes on.